to Business Talks with the Rebel Entrepreneur. Let's cut the BS for a sec. No matter how successful you think you are, there's always more to learn about being in business. This podcast is about pushing through adversity, challenging the status quo, and learning what you don't know from kick-ass entrepreneurs who've been there, done that. Let's do this.
It's Diana Noble here, aka the Rebel Entrepreneur, and I'm here for another episode of Business Talks with the Rebel Entrepreneur. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that really relates to a lot of people, specifically business owners, in regards to what success really means. Success is one of those things that's very different for every individual person. But I can tell you from experience, one thing that it's really not is just the money in your bank account. There's so many different pieces of what success actually means. So I'm excited to have my guest here today, Kevin Palmieri, and he is the CFO, founder, and co-host of Next Level University, which is a global top 100 self-improvement podcast with over 1,100 episodes. That blows my mind. And 650,000 listens in over 125 countries. Through his podcast and speaking, he has made it his life's purpose to give a positive impact on as many people as possible, taking his podcast from zero to multi-six-figure business with over 1,000 episodes. And in those episodes, he shares lessons he's learned along the way in regards to love, life, health, and wealth. Hello, Kevin. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Anytime I get to connect with you, it's a good time. So I'm appreciative of you having me on, and I'm excited to see where we go today.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Of course.
I am really inspired by your story because when you and I initially connected and I had kind of read about some of your journey, you said in your bio that you found out that rock bottom had a basement. Mm. So can you talk about, when you were starting out, the trajectory that your life was on that led you to that point?
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's almost like there was very low expectations of me and then became very high expectations of me, and then it became very low again and then very high. So just for context, I was raised by my mom and my grandmother, definitely lower middle class. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad until I was 27, and I decided at a pretty early age I didn't want to go to college. I didn't know what that was going to mean later in life. I just knew I didn't want to do it. So I ended up job hopping for most of my life, but I ended up eventually getting this very unique opportunity in an industry called weatherization. So all that means is we would go into state-owned buildings, usually schools, and we would make them more energy efficient. We'd work on the windows, we'd work on the doors, we'd work in the attics. We would keep the good air in and the bad air out. That was kind of our jam. Yep. The beautiful side of this was that job, since I worked on state contracts, I was making anywhere from $60 to $120 an hour. Nice. Now, as somebody in their early 20s with no college degree, it looks like I'm crushing it, right? I'm making more money than all my friends. It's like, okay, we're on to something here. Yep. So if you fast forward a few years, when I was 25, I had a girlfriend that was a model. I had a new sports car. I had a brand new apartment. I had the body of my dreams because I just won a bodybuilding show, and I have this high-paying job. So life, love, health, and wealth, it looks like I have all those. Mm-hmm. But I was very insecure. I didn't have any confidence. I had no idea of what I wanted my future to look like. I didn't feel like I had any purpose. It was a very weird thing for me. It was a very weird feeling. And one day my girlfriend came to me, and she said, Kev, I have these goals and these dreams and these aspirations. I want to move from New Hampshire to California. And in my scarcity and in my insecurity and in my fear, I gave her every reason in the world why she shouldn't do it. So she ended up leaving me, as she should have, and she moved across the country and chased her dreams. And when she left, that was my initial rock bottom because it was kind of a perfect storm of my girlfriend leaves, now my rent just doubled. Now my bills just doubled.
Right.
Work is now slow, of course. It's very slow. So I'm kind of struggling to make ends meet. I initially started looking inward and saying, okay, what does this mean about you? What could you have done better? Let's talk about that. But then I quickly pivoted to, I need to go make more money. That's it. That is exactly what needs to happen here. So I remember I started saying positive affirmations to myself. And I would say, I'm talented, I'm handsome, I'm worthy, I'm intelligent, and this year I'm going to make the most money I've ever made. And that was the one I really focused on. So my girlfriend left me in October. That next year starts, and I get promoted to a foreman at my company. That means I'm running the jobs, I'm starting them, I'm closing them out. And if you fast forward to the end of that year, I had been living in hotels on the road for 10 months out of the year because most of our contracts were on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to the end of the year, pay stub in hand. I open it up. And before I did, I said my goal was to make $100,000 this year. At 26, did I do it? And I did. And nothing changed. My emotions shifted for all of 5 minutes. It felt really good to see the number. And I had money in my bank. And it was like, that was cool. But nothing internally shifted. I was no more confident. I was no more aligned. I was no more on purpose. I was far less fulfilled than I expected. And that was an interesting moment for me where I realized that for most of my life, especially that year, I had lived unconsciously. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And I fell in love with podcasting and what it represented to me as I was falling out of love with my job. So I'm falling in love with podcasting. I'm falling out of love with this job that has provided me quote unquote success. So I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job site early. I start showing up late. I'm not a model employee anymore. I don't care. But it got to the point where I would literally have to be, so Monday morning, we would be starting a job, 7 a.m., 6 hours away from where I lived. So most people went to the hotel the night before. They'd just drive out on Sunday. They'd sleep there. I slept at my house 6 hours away from like 9 p.m. until midnight on Sunday. And then I woke up and drove 6 hours straight to the job site. And then I'd work an 8-hour day because I was just so homesick. That's probably the best way to explain it. And it got to the point where I just felt like I was stuck and I'm trapped and I don't know how to get out of this. I don't really see there being a very bright future for me. So I was in New Jersey for a job, cold winter morning. My alarm clock goes off at 5:15. I sit up, I slide to the edge of the bed, lacing up my work boots. And that morning, it was like there was 10 televisions on in my head and every single one was on a different station. One is saying you're stuck here forever. I know you don't like this, but you will never achieve this level of success again. You got lucky. Do not mess this up. If you do work up the courage to leave, what are your friends going to think? You make more money than any of your friends. If you do work up the courage to leave, what is your family going to think? Your family looks up to you. I mean, you make more money than anybody in your family ever has. And if you do work up the courage to leave, do you really think you're going to be a podcaster? Is that really it? Like that's plan B? That's what you're going to go with. Okay, interesting. And in that moment, I felt that if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. Now, very blessed, and I say this all the time, because I have a wonderful group of human beings around me. So I got brave and I got vulnerable, and I messaged one of my really, really good friends. And I said, hey, Alan, I'm struggling, brother. I don't know what to do. I'm having these feelings, these emotions, these thoughts. I don't know what to do. And he said many things, but the things that really stuck out, or the number one thing that stuck out for me, was over the last couple of years, your awareness has shifted a ton, but your environments have remained the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So I ended up leaving my job 3 or 4 months later, partnering up with Alan, the person I texted, and then I became an entrepreneur and a full-time podcaster trying to figure out how to make money and how to grow a business and a brand. And I was $35,000 in credit card debt, and I couldn't afford to pay rent, and I couldn't buy my now wife Christmas present. So I don't ever want anyone to think it went from I was miserable, I left my job, and now I'm here. Because honestly, the first 3 years after I left my job were harder than anything else. Anything I ever did at that job, it was harder after that.
I think one of the things that really stuck out to me in your story is, and that a lot of people have a challenge with, is that they look for validation externally. They look for change externally. Now, ultimately, you had to change your environment. That's kind of external as well. But what I mean by external is like the job, the money, the the status or whatever the case may be. They think that if they get, if they reach this milestone, then they'll be happy. Or if they make this much money, then they'll be successful. But like you said, when you had reached your goal at the end of the year and you had made over $100,000, that joy lasted a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
The problem, it was very fleeting. The problem is so this is the thing. I traded in all the movement and freedom. I didn't have any time freedom because I was always on the road. I traded in so much certainty because I'm a very certainty-driven human. I didn't know where I was going the next week. I would just get an address, and I would get a blueprint and a floor plan. They say, this is where you're going. Oh, I'm going to Virginia. All right, cool. That's good to know. Like, that's 14-hour drive. Oh, all right. Like, I didn't have any certainty. So for me, movement and freedom, that's like one of my number one motivators. And then certainty is such a human need for me. I traded some of the most important things for something that I thought was more important. And then you get in this weird paradox where that's not sustainable, right? How long am I not going to get some of my basic human needs met in order to overpour on one of my human needs? So that was an interesting place for me to realize it's almost like, I traded, pardon the analogy, it probably won't be a good one, but I traded the water and I got more rice and I got more pasta and I got more things that you need to put water into to actually create. That's
Right.
kind of what happened. That's kind of what happened for me.
Yeah. And a lot of people go through that, I think. And thankfully for you, thankfully for me, we both went through something like that early on enough in our lives. I have some clients who are in their 50s, 60s sometimes, where they're just realizing that now. They're like, what have I done for the past 40 years? I am not happy. I don't feel successful. And yet other people might look at them and say, oh yeah, you've got it all. But who really determines that? It's not other people, it's ourselves, right? And that's why so many people that look seemingly successful from an outside perspective end up doing what you had thought about doing, which is ending it all.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's something else that's missing. So what is that something else?
Fulfillment. I believe it's fulfillment. And this is the problem. Fulfillment is very hard to recognize in other human beings, and fulfillment doesn't move the needle. So all I mean by that is you can't really take a picture of fulfillment. You can take a picture of happiness, though. I think happiness is somebody standing in front of a nice car. That's okay. You can have momentary happiness. I love nice cars. I like nice things, but that's not sustainable, right? That's not a sustainable fuel source for a purpose-driven life for most of us. Fulfillment, I believe, is what's missing, and fulfillment comes from you living in your purpose. It comes from you growing towards something that you ultimately want. It comes from growth and contribution. It comes from, at times, doing hard things that you don't want to do, but you're grateful that you did after. It's not, some people say money can buy happiness. I do agree to some degree. Money can buy some momentary bouts of happiness. Again, nice cars are nice cars, but it's not fulfillment. It's different. That's a different game. I think happiness is kind of like if you order pizza once a week. It's like, all right, cool. You can do that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do on Saturday, you look forward to that. But there's something fulfilling about getting up, going to the gym, working really hard, working a great, productive, aligned day, and then getting to the end of the day and saying, wow, I'm so glad I did all that. I'm so grateful. I'm so fulfilled. I could do this forever. I just think that's what a lot of us are looking for. And here's the thing. If you look at me on social media, it might look like I'm successful and it might look like I'm happy. I am happy, but I'm more fulfilled than I am happy. And I think so you might look at me and say, okay, I need to get what Kevin has, which is happiness. You just can't see the fulfillment because you don't really see me behind the scenes doing what I love every day.
I love that distinction between happiness and fulfillment, because you're absolutely right. I agree with you in terms of money can buy you happiness in a sense. not long lasting, sustainable happiness, because if you have just, that kind of a happiness, that fulfillment won't be a part of that, right? Like for me, for example, I love traveling and I need money to be able to travel so that I can have that experience, which does end up fulfilling me. But an accumulation of stuff, and a lot of people get into that trap, right? They'll be like, oh, I got the nice house. Oh, I got the nice car. Oh, I got 2 nice cars. Oh, I got the travel trailer. And I'm not going to suggest that I don't have any of those things, because I absolutely do. But if you don't have that higher purpose, then at the end of the day, you can have all of those things, but it doesn't amount to much, right?
It's the intention behind the decision. I think that's the thing, is like, if you think, so this is my dream car. If you're listening, I have a little model of it's a Mercedes AMG GTR. It's a very, very nice, very fast car. I will be happier driving that car than I am something else. Okay. I believe that wholeheartedly. But when I buy that car, I am not expecting or intending on that unlocking anything internally. I do not believe that is going to help my mental health. I don't think it's going to help my relationship. I don't think it's going to make me more confident necessarily. Maybe in bouts it will. That I think the intention behind the decision making is super important. I originally bought a nice car because I thought it would make me feel better. I knew it would make me look better, but I thought it would make me feel better internally as much as externally. And it didn't. I felt happy. There was a sense of accomplishment and pride, but I think we have to differentiate from, I think the ultimate goal is to have external, if you want to say success, and internal success paired. A lot of us, myself included, this is why I fell so far and I fell so fast. My internal state was drastically less than my external state. Mm-hmm. I could never live up to the facade that I had built because I wasn't like that internally. And I think that's the challenge, is the internal work is painful at times. You kind of can't show it. It doesn't really come off as anything shiny or sexy, but that's where all the growth is. All the growth is inside.
Yeah. And I'll tell you from my own personal experience, I just shared it on Facebook the other day. I'm going to share this with you because I thought it was kind of funny. So when I started really focusing on my growth, that was about 11 years ago now. And so I always say that my post on Facebook, it says, ever wonder just how far you've come? Facebook memories are a great indicator. Hard to believe that 11 years ago, I had this limiting belief that I could not control my own actions. Wow, that blows my mind. The only thing we have control of is ourselves. And I won't share the rest of it. It says, I can't tell you how different my life has become as a result of the inner work I started doing on later that year and continuing into 2013. When I finally took responsibility for my choices, my actions, and my outcomes, everything shifted in the most profound way. So the memory that I shared, this is what it said from January 30th, 2012. If my brain and sense of logic were capable of controlling my emotions and automatic reactions and judgments towards aspects of my life and the people in it, then life would be a breeze. Instead, the constant battle between the two have me thinking I'm somewhat insane, but from a logical standpoint. Well, back then, before I had taken and done that inner work, before I had taken control of my own outcomes, before I had taken control of my thoughts. And at that point in time, I was an employee as well. So I wasn't a full-time entrepreneur. I had my one business, but I hadn't made the shift yet. That was later on that year to full-time entrepreneurship. I very much was that external kind of a person, right? It was trying to show, oh, I'm successful because I have this, or I'm successful because I have that. I had not been contributing to society. I had not been focusing on my own internal growth. And I look back now from 11 years of really focusing on those things. And I'm like, holy shit, man, I was just I don't even have an answer. Like, I don't even have a word for what I feel like I was back then. I was like an empty shell of a human being who had so much potential that was untapped at that point in time. And it really was that shift for me in that year that changed my perspective when I started to focus on how can I help other people? How can I contribute to society? How can I do that inner work to grow as a person, to feel that fulfillment that you were talking about?
Yeah. I believe, and this is just my belief, one of the best parts of being an entrepreneur is you learn more about yourself than anything else. I really believe that. Every time something happens, I had a conversation today with a client, and I said, hey, I'm going to give you a discount on your next month. Because
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning into Business Talks with the Rebel Entrepreneur with your host, Diana Noble.
Kind of swallowing my
If you
pride
like
and
this
saying, "Look, we need to
episode
do better,"
and want
I
more
apologize
business
for that.
tips from the Rebel
I might
herself,
not have had an
give
opportunity
@Noble
to do it
Choice
in that
Coaching a
specific
follow
way if I
on
wasn't an
Facebook and
entrepreneur.
Instagram.
At least,
Have a topic
with
you
that
want covered on a
modality. So I
future
think that's
episode?
another interesting
Reach out
thing.
and let's do
A
it.
lot of people
Now,
think
go kick some
external
ass.
success comes from external actions. But a lot of it comes from internal stuff too. I mean, it's not always a strategy or a tactic or an email that you need to send. Sometimes it's like, hey, you need to figure yourself out and figure out what's holding you back internally. Where are our scarcities coming from? Where are our triggers? What, our traumas? It's just such an important unlock for most people.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the most successful entrepreneurs out there are ones that are doing things for money for their business that align with their internal value system. Right.
Yeah.
And having that flexibility to be able to give back, to have that flexibility to make those true connections with others, to give them discounts if you feel like you didn't. And that must have really been a values thing for you, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you have a high value of great service. You have a high value of being of service to other people. And in that moment, you felt like, well, hey, you know what? I didn't honor that value within me to do my best job for you. And as a result, this is what I'm going to do. Am I right?
Yeah, I would like, in an ideal world, the client to say the same thing during our working together as they would after. That's really that's my ultimate goal, is like, will this person stay forever? No. Is this going to help them stay? I don't know. I'd rather them just say, yeah, even if it doesn't work out, you were a good person. Like that's what I want at the end of the day. And I believe that helps everything else anyway. So it's an ultimate win-win.
Yeah. And making sure that you have that congruence in your life. Because I know that there's a lot of people, for example, who they are chasing this external validation of what success is. And sometimes they're not doing the most integrity-driven things to get there. And I've had clients or people who have worked with me who have said, well, why does this person, like, look, they're getting all the deals, or they're, doing all the business. And yet we know that they're not doing the right things. And I say, well, you know what? I might not look on the surface like I'm as successful as those people. You might not look like you're as successful as those people, but we can sleep at night because we know that we're doing the right things. And I truly believe that doing the right things in your business are what's going to help it grow. And then you have, again, that congruence, right? I don't want to look like I'm successful on the surface, but then be miserable behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Like, what is the point of that?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you were too.
Yeah. I genuinely believe this. We are doing worse. And again, I know it's going to pay off, but we're doing worse in business than we could be doing because we refuse to budge from our core values. And I do believe people understanding your core values is super important, but I also know there are some shortcuts we could take if we wanted to that we're not willing to take. I know they weren't because I've seen a lot of people do them, but that's outside of the realm of alignment for me. I want to win the way I want to win. That's important to me. That's important to me. And here's the other thing. So I think about it from a core values, core beliefs, core aspirations, core community kind of setup. The more aligned you are with those 4 buckets, the longer you can do something, because you're actually living a life that you want. To your point, you can go to sleep feeling good and you can wake up feeling good and say, all right, I'm ready to do it again. You can only be out of alignment so long before something breaks. And when that breaks, that's where people, that's where things can get ugly. So it's very important to figure out, I guess, to the whole thought of this episode, what do you want success to look like? And run it through the frame of core values. What are my core values? Decency as a human, charity, support, patience, whatever it is. What are my core beliefs? Self-improvement can help anybody. That is a core belief I have. Core aspiration, to have the most successful self-improvement podcast on the planet. That's a big one, but that's why we do things the way we do, right? And then core community. I want to surround myself with character-driven human beings. That is what I aspire for. If you can figure out how to get a little bit closer in each of those, I think you'll ultimately feel successful because it's personal to you.
That you could just write a book about that. And if you do, I will definitely be the one to buy it. But
well, I would give it to you.
You just spoke my exact language. And there's so much to be said for doing the things that are right by you so that you have a successful life, and really just taking into consideration all of those pieces that equate to what success means for you. Everyone's going to have a different definition of that. But there's so many pieces of our lives. I always like to say, your business should be a vehicle through which you live your best life, not something that holds you back from it. Mm-hmm. And where people get out of alignment, right, is because either, they're not passionate anymore, or they're not doing things that are congruent with their values, or they're not, they're just not doing things that feed their soul. And again, like you said, you can only take so much of that before something's got to give. And thankfully for us, I think we have figured it out, but it's always a journey. You know what I mean? There's no getting there. It's that mastery mindset, not the destination mindset. What piece of advice, just to finish off today's podcast here, what piece of advice would you give to anyone who feels like they are stuck, like what you were, where, maybe on the surface level, they look successful, but there's something missing within them? What piece of advice would you give to someone like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say look into your past. I don't think I understood at the time that many of the decisions I was making was not based necessarily on the future. It wasn't necessarily based on the present current. It was based on the past. It was based on the fact that I grew up as a kid without a lot of money. I grew up with a chip on my shoulder because my dad left. I think part of me wanted to prove everybody wrong. I didn't go to college. Watch me be successful. I'm going to be successful. I promise. That. So much of my day-to-day was not day-to-day. It was from previous years. So I think when you're stuck, a lot of us look in the future, and I think that's great. A lot of us look in the present. I think that's wonderful too. I think it might be beneficial to look in the past to figure out how you ended up where you are today. And then I think just try stuff. I got lucky where I was interviewed on a podcast, and I said, after the hour and a half, I said, imagine if you could do that for a living. And now I get to do that for a living after many, many, many moons of hard work. But I kind of fell into that. So I think you got to try different stuff. And then the last thing I would say is you have to define your mud. So all I mean by that is when I left my job, some people say, wow, I really wish I could leave my job and go all in on my thing. It sounds great, but my mud was not being able to pay rent, literally having credit card companies chase me because I was so far in debt, being very broke for a long period of time, getting anxiety because I was so far in my anxiety zone, where somebody else's mud might be working at a job that they don't like for the next year and a half while they do photography on the weekend so they can start to build up that progress. Just understand and define your mud, and then also try to get very specific on what does progress feel like to you. Because progress is what we're all looking for. We're all after progress. So it doesn't have to happen overnight. It can happen once a week. It can happen every weekend. And then you can kind of transition that more to a higher level of progress is what I would say.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that insight. I am a huge fan of the side hustle, I have to say, but kudos to you for just going all in, and look, it's paid off.
Yes, it has been a challenge though. It looks really good now, but there was a lot of days where I was like, I don't know if this is going to work.
But that's the thing. And I wanted to just challenge you on, you said you were lucky. No, my friend. You put in a lot of hard work. You were focused and you made it happen. And that is incredible.
I appreciate it.
A lot of people could learn from you. But speaking of learning from you, if people want to stay in touch with you, Kevin, how do they get in touch with you? Can you give us some ideas about your podcast and where they can find you?
Yeah, I always suggest the podcast. I think that's the best place. We do an episode every single day, so you're going to figure out pretty quickly, A, we're your type of people, B, maybe we're not. Either way, I will still love you. So just search Next Level University. We're on all the podcast platforms as well as YouTube, and then everything you need to contact us is in the show notes, so you can find it very easily there.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Kevin, and really appreciate you.
My pleasure.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in to Business Talks with the Rebel Entrepreneur with your host, Diana Noble. If you like this episode and want more business tips from the Rebel herself, give @Noble Choice Coaching a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Have a topic you want covered on a future episode? Reach out and let's do it. Now, go kick some ass.